I'm going to just kick it all off, and so that we can. So, hi everyone. I'm Allegra Spendon, member for Wentworth, and it is my honour this evening to be talking about gambling ads with Reverend Tim Costello. I want to acknowledge firstly, before we get going, that that I'm coming from the land of the Gadigal. Eora Nation in beautiful Wentworth, and wanted to pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that the issue of gambling and gambling losses affects all Australians, including First Nations Australians as well, particularly in how in these sorts of ads can be targeted towards the most vulnerable. This is a really important issue. It's one that I get constantly approached by in the community on the street. And so I'm delighted to have with me tonight to talk about gambling ads, and the legislation that's before the Parliament, Reverend Tim Costello. And so it's not a lot of introduction, but I'll give him an introduction anyway. He is the chief advocate of the Alliance for Gambling Reform and is one of Australia's most respected community leaders and sought after voices on social justice issues, leadership, and ethics. For 13 years until 2016, Tim was the chief executive of World Vision Australia. And in his current role with the Alliance for Gambling Reform, Tim is putting awareness of gambling harm on the national agenda. And currently, this year, Tim is the executive director of the MICA Australia, a Christian group which encourages advocacy against extreme poverty, rising conflict, and climate change. And I want to acknowledge because I've met with some of your really wonderful colleagues as well from
Thank you.
the country, and the work that you do in that role as well as in this role is pretty special. So why are we holding tonight? We know that Australians are the biggest gambling losers in the world. Australians like to be the top of things, but in terms of gambling, we are top of the losers. We lose more per capita than any other country. Last year, we lost $32 billion, half of which was in the, and that in terms of Australians, that's a loss of around per capita around $1,600 per year per Australian. So it's an enormous amount of money that we are losing. The government has, this is an issue that many people have been worrying about, Australia's losses, sort of world-leading gambling losses. And under enormous, I think, community pressure, the government has finally announced a suite of reforms in one bill, which is legislation has just been introduced to Parliament, but not passed through either the House or the Senate. And this legislation comes out of the Murphy Review, which was a parliamentary review led by the late Peter Murphy MP, which produced 31 recommendations that were unanimous across all the parties, across and crossbenchers. My colleague Kate Chaney was on that review. And among those review recommendations is a total ban on online gambling advertising, a national regulator, a ban on inducements and their advertising. So the government has made some moves, and I think the fact that we even have some legislation before the Parliament, I think, is really down to continued community pressure. The Prime Minister has been answering questions from the crossbench on gambling advertising for much of the last 4 years. And most of those answers start with, we have done more on gambling than anybody else has ever done. And until actually this legislation, the commitment from the government to introduce this legislation, their line, the Prime Minister's own line was, we have done more than any government has ever done. And they did not and failed to even respond to the Murphy Review, despite it being, having an obligation to respond within 6 months. They had left it, I think it was over 800 days before they actually came to responding to the review at all. And finally, we've now got a response in the legislation. So I think while tonight we are going to talk about the shortcomings of the legislation, about what we would like to see change, I think we should also recognise that this is a step forward, and the step forward has been achieved by community pressure. And I think it is really important right now to keep that community pressure up, because I think that is the opportunity to see further changes in this legislation. And I think that is important because the appetite for change doesn't come around all that often. I think this is a great opportunity we have for change, and I think it's one that we should try and capitalise on. So let me tell you briefly about the government's what they have put forward in the bill. They have restricted gambling ads to 3 per hour between 6 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. There will be a complete ban on ads during live sport broadcasts, but only if the games are between 6 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. After 8:30 p.m., they can run gambling ads as they wish to during the breaks, e.g., in halftime and unscheduled breaks. There is a ban on celebrity influencer and athlete endorsements. There's a ban in ads on sports venues and on uniforms. And there is opt-out functionality available for online platforms. So platforms have to offer opt-out functionality like social media or so those are some of the core pieces, and there's going to be a radio ad ban in school drop-off and pickup hours. So really, that's the lay of the land. Now, what we have had to date is in this Zoom, we've had a bunch of questions that people have submitted to us beforehand, and I'm going to start with some questions, Tim, a bit of discussion points between you and I. Then we'll go through some of those pre-submitted Q&A, and then we would love to have any questions through the Zoom chat as well. So I will, so feel free for people to add questions to the Zoom chat. You can add questions there, and then that we can use in that final section of our Q&A for this evening. And we're going to try and wrap up at 7:45 because I know people are giving up their Tuesday night as it is. So, and particularly you, Tim, I don't want you to get too sleepy if you've just got back from overseas. Um, so let me start off with you, Tim. Tim, you've been an advocate for gambling ad reform literally for decades. Um, how have you seen the political sentiment and so public sentiment and political will shift over this change? And why? Why is this so important to you?
So, firstly, let me say that you, Allegra, with the other independents, have been magnificent in raising this issue. And if you ever wondered why an independent, gambling is exactly one of the reasons. Independents listen to their community. They're not
Mm,
beholden to vested interests. They aren't in a faction. They aren't preferring ministerial advancement or pre-selection.
mm,
And without the independents and your courage, Allegra, we wouldn't be where we are today. And to all those who support you, so thank you deeply.
Thank you.
Um, my journey, I wasn't particularly fussed about gambling. People think because I've got Reverend in my name, I must be have a moral religious objection. No,
Mm,
my father and I loved watching the races, and we weren't, as a family, worried about gambling. As
mm,
a lawyer, I represented a woman after poker machines were just introduced into Victoria in 1992. Middle-aged, happily married, 3 kids, didn't smoke or drink, and had never even had a speeding fine. She started gambling socially with her girlfriends, found herself going back, lost so much money to hide it from her family and her husband to pay the mortgage. She stole from her work. She stole $60,000. She asked me to represent her. In
mm,
1993, I represented her, and it sounds shocking today. She was given 4 years jail.
mm,
You wouldn't get that for stealing 60,000 for gambling today.
mm, mm,
I visited her in Tarrangower Women's Prison, and my question was, how does a middle-aged woman who's never been in trouble with the law end up in jail for 4 years? It
mm,
completely blew my mind. That's when I got interested in gambling and the nature of addiction.
mm,
Wrote a book called Wanna Bet, Winners and Losers in Gambling's Luck Myth. That was back in the year 1999. So that's where it started for me. Secondly, what has changed? So for a lot of the time I have raised the issue, I've been on the receiving end, even from the media, even from The Age, Sydney Morning Herald that said, "Oh, he must be a wowser. Go
mm,
away. We love our gambling." So I felt
mm,
very alone and attacked and sued three
mm.
times by the gambling industry.
Wow.
It's why My only asset, our family home, is in my wife's name, and it sure keeps me in the marriage. It was a good move. Uh, but seriously, public opinion was against me.
Mm-hmm.
What changed was really the sports gambling ads.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Australia had 75% of the world's pokies in pubs and clubs, most pokies are in casinos. So that's a different business. Destination gambling, you plan to be there, pay for your dinner, your parking, get home. When they're on every fifth block, you didn't intend to gamble, you intended to shop, and you have an extra half hour on the parking meter, and there's always a pokies venue close
Mm-hmm.
by that's open. So even though we had 75% of the world's pokies, most Australians, because less than 25% of Australians play the pokies, said, well, it's their own fault. They don't have to gamble. You can be responsible. You can choose. And the industry, of course, dressed gambling up as the fundamentally Aussie thing to do. They will still say, why do we have the greatest losses? Because we, of all nations, love gambling more than any other culture. When I wrote my book
Mm-hmm.
and did a literature search, I discovered the Chinese, the Irish, the Kiwis, the English, the list goes on, all boast of being the greatest lovers of gambling. This idea that it's peculiarly Australian is nonsense, but the
Mm-hmm.
industry actually dressed it up as this is Aussie. But we weren't getting anywhere when Gillard, after the second Productivity Commission report, she was Prime Minister, minority government, Andrew Wilkie, she needed his support, said, I'll introduce what the Productivity Commission recommended, a mandatory pre-commitment card, call it a cashless card. So you
Mm-hmm.
can't use cash to play the pokies. You've got to lock in your losses before you're in front of the machine. You choose your loss amount. You choose the time you're locked out. When Gillard tried to implement that, she was smashed
Mm-hmm.
by AHA hotels, by New South Wales clubs, by
Mm-hmm.
Alan Jones. This is un-Australian. And Labor have the scars, and it explains something today of Labor and Prime Minister Albanese from Sydney's attitude. Never, ever take on the gambling industry. They are too powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But pokies was still this idea, well, you don't have to gamble. What changed Allegra was the advent of gambling ads.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, people who don't gamble are all watching ads. Kids that don't gamble, it's illegal to gamble, though 600,000 12 to 17-year-olds illegally gambled last year, losing 20 million. Suddenly, we're all being inundated with gambling ads. That's what changed.
Mm-hmm.
This was no longer a matter of choice. We didn't choose in watching NRL, AFL to watch those ads. Kids didn't choose. So the industry's argument that with pokies or the races, you have a choice,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly shifted, and the culture said, wait a minute. We used to have tobacco sponsoring sport, and that was a legal product, an adult product, and we got it out. We used to have alcohol, I don't mind a drink, legal adult product, sponsoring sport, we got that out. How does this legal adult product groom kids?
Mm-hmm.
That, I think, is why now 80% of Australians want the Murphy Report, a total ban on gambling ads.
Mm-hmm. And look, I think, and that's interesting that you say that. It's certainly the piece that I get from the community is, I remember very vividly one person writing into me saying, my 7-year-old just asked me what a same game multi is, and
Mm,
that's the sort of, and people are
mm,
genuinely really worried about it. I see
mm.
this now, if I'm watching television, the sort of the both the prevalence of the ads and also how it's effectively saying this is not just about gambling, this is about spending time with your friends.
Yes.
This is about, connecting to people. You connect to people through gambling. It's a really different way, even in the, few years that I've been really focused on gambling ads, seeing how that is being constructed and how that is being fed to people, throughout their time, and also increasingly targeting women, because I think historically it's been particularly
Yes,
targeting men, but now more so, it's more focused now on women than it has been in the past as well, which has been interesting to me.
yes, yes. Yeah,
Now,
look,
go
so
on, sorry.
I just totally agree. And I just add that the number of parents that stop me in the street, strangers to me, but they've
Yeah.
recognized me, with sheer fury saying, it's hard enough to protect my kids. How come they know the odds on every AFL NRL game? How come they ask me about a multi? Uh,
Mm,
so we're not just talking about lived experience, people who've got into addiction problems with gambling. We're talking about the lived experience of parents trying to protect their kids.
mm.
That's the fundamental pernicious nature.
Yeah, and I think certainly I think that protection of kids, but also those people who are trying to exclude themselves. Like I remember very vividly, I was talking to a woman who's in King's Cross at one of my sort of pop-up offices, and she was saying that her son had a gambling problem. He had self-excluded from from all the local sort of venues to try and stop gambling, to try and get on top of that. And he said, but he was listening to, podcasts and stuff like that on Spotify. And he said to his mum, I feel like I'm just being pursued. But she was, working two jobs, working as a cleaner, doing everything she could to try and help him
Mm.
through this addiction. But the sense that he couldn't escape it
Yes.
was incredibly difficult for someone who was trying to make that conscious choice that this was ruining his life. And I think it is really, really hard. Tell me, Tiff, let's talk to the Murphy Review, because there has been a big focus. It was a review, as I said, in the Parliament led by Peter Murphy, a Labor MP who has subsequently passed away, and was a very strong and forthright, I think, member of Parliament. And the government took, now look at my notes, it took actually over 1,000 days to
1,000 days. That's right.
respond to the report's recommendations, despite the fact that you're meant to respond within 100 and I think 86 basically, or 80, no, 183. Um, but one of the things that the Murphy Review recommended was a complete ban of online ads for gambling. Why? But the government's elected to do partial bans. Can you tell me a bit about, why you think, what's your perspective on sort of full bans versus partial bans, and what's the evidence around these things?
Yeah, so Peter Murphy, joined by Independents, Greens, Nationals, Liberals, and another Labor colleague in a
Mm,
unanimous recommendation. People often say it's so partisan and adversarial. This was the example of multi-partisan consensus. She was absolutely right to recommend a full ad ban, phased in over 3 years. So the free-to-air TV, which, Kerry Stokes has AFL and Channel 7, and Channel 9 has NRL, phased in so they can find other sponsors. Totally right to say a total gambling ad ban, because the evidence from tobacco and elsewhere, a partial bans simply don't work.
mm,
Partial bans actually don't work. Now, reducing it from 8 an hour to 3 an hour might sound good, but if we had 3 cigarette ads an hour, we wouldn't say kids are
mm,
protected. The really worrying thing is that free-to-air TV structurally is in problems anyway. Streaming is taking over.
mm,
And what is really devastating about this package that Albanese is proposing is that it says, well, you can opt out of ads on streaming, because
mm,
streaming is now going to be how you watch your sport. Already a KO. So many aren't watching free to air, where the bands are unlimited. It sounds good, opt out, because it sounds like free choice, liberal society. Prime Minister says I've got the balance right. People have a right to punt. Firstly, Prime Minister, nobody's banning the right to punt. Spain, Belgium, other European nations have banned gambling ads totally. And those Europeans have a right to punt and still punt a lot. It's
Mm.
only ads. He says, but it's a balance and you can opt out. The problem of opting out is because we've had 2 years of experience with SBS that gave the right to opt out is it's really complex to do. And many people who have tried to do it have failed to do it. We know that it's 0.2% of people that opted out of SBS's gambling ads. In other words, what you're going to end up with if history repeats itself with streaming, which we think it will if it's opt out, is effectively unlimited gambling ads on streaming, which is the dominant way most of us now consume sport and watch everything else. Um, we support, if not a full gambling ad ban, and I think that's the gold standard. European nations have done it. Why can't we? But if not, an opt-in uh, process, because if gambling ads effectively banned, but you can have them if you want them, if you opt in, I think that could go close to
Mm.
achieving the same outcomes as a full gambling ad ban. Now, I still want a full gambling ad ban,
Mhm.
but I am encouraged that at this point, the Liberals have found some backbenchers with backbone. They stood up in their party room a few Tuesdays ago. They didn't allow Albanese's package to be waved through, and they're pushing an opt-in. It's now going to a Senate inquiry. That Senate inquiry, I have no doubt, will reinforce what the Murphy inquiry said. The public overwhelmingly want it. The AMA, the professional health and caring, and ACOS, and go through the list, want the uh, Murphy report. The Senate will reaffirm that. But that's where we're up to, Allegra.
Yeah. No, I think it's look, I think I agree with your assessment, and my understanding is that in previous times, some of the restrictions that were previously placed on gambling ads meant actually were after those restrictions, we ended up with more investment in gambling ads regardless, because it doesn't change, it doesn't stop it, it just pushes it in slightly different directions, but it still happens. And I think
Yep.
one of the things that I think is important, again, things like the pokies, they're much more driven at the state level. Where the federal government steps in is on this online advertising. And I think it's right to focus on sports because if we look at where the betting growth is really happening, the betting, we're expecting to sports betting to increase by around 22% a year through to 2035. Like that is enormous growth. It's been one of the fastest growing areas of gambling that we've seen in the country. And around 34% of Australian adults place sports or racing wagers regularly. So it's a really huge part of what's happened, but has changed enormously. I think certainly in my lifetime. So I think that is again one of the reasons why I think addressing sports betting is absolutely critical, because it's an area that has changed so much. And I think given if it's allowed to, will continue to get only stronger. One of the things I outside, because the big, one of the big stadiums is in my electorate. People put on all the cars around the stadium. It looked like a parking ticket. And it said, community fine for not putting in, not joining in the tipping competition, your loss up to $50,000. So it was really interesting to see how aggressive
Yeah.
this and imaginative, to be honest,
Mm,
the sort of
mm,
advertising has gone to when it comes to sport betting.
mm,
Look, I'm going to go through some of the pre-questioned, actually briefly go to inducements because this is an area that I've focused a lot on.
mm.
the focus on inducements. And those are the sort of text messages and prompts that people will get if perhaps they've self-excluded for a period of time, if they've made a not if they've decided, not to bet for a bit, if they've had a bunch of losses. That's where people can get those sorts of inducements, particularly text messages and sometimes calls, I understand, to try and encourage people back into gambling by giving them free bets or those kind of pieces. Why, Tim, can you give me some example of inducements, and why do you think this is such an important part of the landscape?
Yeah, so Peter Murphy interrogated the CEO of Sportsbet, and it essentially was when you're taking $2.2 billion a year out of Australia, an Irish company, its CEO in Dublin paid $6 million a year. Why, without one shop or outlet, why do you need 1,200 staff? The answer was those staff are following every bet.
Mm,
And if you are losing, you get inducements. Not even if you banned yourself or are trying to
mm,
stay, just if you're losing. Free money, match your bet, bonus bets,
mm,
VIP tickets to events if you keep betting. They are tracking every bet. The irony is this: if you're winning, they track you and they slow you down. And if you keep winning, they block you.
mm,
They are following every bet. How do I know this? My Costello cousins, who happen to be in Sydney, are big gamblers. And they have actually been, in their terms, who would ever believe a Costello? They have actually been winners, they
mm,
say, and been banned when they're winning, slowed down and banned. My cousins are on my side, not because of gambling, but because they say it's not a level playing field. So inducements are a text
mm,
straight to your phone, an SMS text or email. You might be gambling on fourth grade Albanian soccer match at
mhm,
2 a.m. and they know, and they're giving and losing, and they're giving you a bonus. I regard this as drug pushing, literally a drug push, as saying, have some free cocaine or have some free ice because you've been such a good customer. I think they are the most immoral aspect. And I'm profoundly shocked at what Peter Murphy and her committee said was such a simple, obvious thing, ban inducements, is not in the Prime Minister's package. I'm shocked about that.
okay. Look, I agree with you, Tim, and this is an area of focus for me, in terms of the legislation, is particularly this focus on inducements. I wanted to get now to some of these questions that we've been submitted in advance. We had a question from Anthony. Tim, if you'd had your time again with the benefit of hindsight, how would you have adjusted your approach in your campaign against irresponsible gambling?
Uh, well, I probably started a campaign thinking it was about irresponsible gambling, and it took me some time to realize that just blames the individual. Actually, the industry is irresponsible, and I would have shifted to
Mm,
that earlier. It was some years after Anthony Ball, then CEO of New South Wales Clubs, in 2012, went to an NRA conference in America, was taught never blame guns. Guns don't kill, people kill. He came back. He devised the slogan
mhm.
gamble responsibly. He sold that to the New South Wales government, then state governments. Gamble responsibly message, which seemed okay to me for a while. We're against irresponsible gamblers. I've never been a prohibitionist. I suddenly realized actually was stigmatizing, silencing, blaming the individual. Actually, it is
Mm,
the industry that is utterly irresponsible.
mm,
So if I had my time over
mm.
again, I would have gone on to that a lot earlier.
Okay, that's a very thoughtful insight. A question from David. What can be done or should be done about replacing foregone gambling revenue from worthy, especially regional clubs? I want to jump on that. I might start with that question and then hand to you, Tim. So most of those regional clubs are supported more by pokies rather than they are by sports bets. We do see, it's interesting, I just found this out, 9% of NRL teams and 87% of AFL teams in Australia have at least one official gambling partner. However, for grassroots and community clubs, most of the money comes from pokies, venues, which is of local RSLs, leagues, clubs, bowls, clubs, or pubs. Um, so to give you some stats, in 2021, regional license clubs gave rugby league around $10 million in total. 8 million that went to grassroots rugby, 2.5 million to NRL clubs, while metropolitan venues gave $30 million, 17 million to grassroots, 12.5 million to NRL. Now, I think those numbers sound large, but this is in an industry where we know that the losses to the country are $31 billion dollars over that sort of in a year as well. So while I think, and I think that is important, let's be honest that the in some cases, the New South Wales scheme, which requires any registered club with gaming machine revenue over a million to direct 1.85% of that revenue into local community projects in exchange for matching gaming tax deduction. That's what's going on. It's a you know it's this is I think this is a bit of community sort of washing effectively, saying, okay, well, these are great members of our community, they're supporting our local clubs. It's these are in the millions, while the losses to the community are literally in the billions. And I think so the scale, I think we need to be honest about the scale here. We recognize we do need to, I'm a big supporter of grants to local clubs, because I think that actually builds community, builds participation. That's really important. But I don't think we should be naive about the scale of the influence. Tim, did you want to add that?
Yeah, look, I totally agree with that. And an interesting contrast is Western Australia, which doesn't have any pokies except in Burswood Casino. Western Australia has higher grants, community participation, and sporting participation than the eastern states. This notion that somehow junior sport fails if we had some gambling reforms is a nonsense. Second point, NRL gets now $50 million a year from the gambling industry.
Mm.
And very little of that, as a percentage, you gave the figures, is just going back to clubs. Third point, no one's going to ban pokies. Pokies, I argue, should simply have the cashless card. That means you set your losses before you're in front of that hypnotizing machine. There's still going to be plenty of revenue in regional pubs or clubs that have pokies for sport. What there won't be is people, once they've set their losses and locked themselves out, doing huge damage to their family. And when you map that damage, and the New South Wales Crime Commission at the time of the last state election did map it, said there's billions of dollars of dirty money being fed through pokies. Your suburban drug dealers wash their money at the pokies. Your
Mm.
suburban burglars wash their money at the pokies. That's why the police commissioner and the crime commissioner said, have the cashless card. You still
Mm.
can play the pokies.
Mm.
Yes, there will be a drop in the pokies revenue with the cashless card. We have it at Crown Casino's 3,000 pokies to get their license. Crown Casino, after the Royal Commission, had to introduce the cashless card. Their pokies throughput is down 20%. Now, that's good. That's good because people who are destroying their lives and then often going and stealing are actually having to set limits and lock themselves out. But there's still profits from Crown Pokies. This idea that somehow gambling reform ends all grants that can be made from regional clubs and pubs from pokies is just not true.
Mm. Okay. Thank you. A question. This is from Graham. Why is Labor afraid to ban or gambling advertising? I know you touched on it before. Is it really that experience of Gillard, do you think? Is it the lobbyists? Is it the sports? I mean, these are all the things. I'd love your insight into this.
Well, when we say Labor, we're actually talking about the leadership, not
Mm.
most members in caucus.
Mm. It's
Most
true.
men,
We've been urging the government to allow a conscience vote because we believe if there was a conscience vote in the parliament, this, a full ban would actually pass the parliament.
absolutely. And my only criticism of those Labor backbenchers and caucus is they speak up in caucus, but they don't speak up, apart from Mike Freelander,
Mm,
outside. And I
mm,
wish they would.
mm,
Uh, Look, the reason being that having had a massive election win, the Prime Minister's like an emperor. He
mhm,
decides they have to absolutely toe it, but they're not. Many in Labor are not happy. Secondly, we have Labor for Gambling Reform, led by Mark Morey, Trades Hall Council,
mm,
and many Labor branches have passed motions wanting the Murphy report. So when we say Labor, we're really saying the Prime Minister
mm,
and certain of those power brokers. Look, the Prime Minister did live through the Gillard reform. He has got the wounds of that.
mm,
I think culturally, if you ask me to guess, the Prime Minister loves his rabbitohs. It's a beer and maybe a punt, and he says, "This is my working class background and culturally, and I don't ever want to, you know, offend those sort of people." I suspect it's that. Um, I think the real issue going on is the vested interests and their power of lobbying. So
mm,
the former Communications Minister, Stephen Conroy, left Parliament and went to be the head of responsible wagering, representing all the sports betting companies. I
mm,
debated him many times. It wasn't a fair fight because he had the direct access to all the ministers and the Prime Minister. He was still on the National Labor Executive pre-selecting candidates when he was uh, CEO of Responsible Wagering.
mm,
He finishes up there. He's now CEO of free-to-air TV.
mm,
Besides the sports betting company, who's the other big power block? It's free-to-air TV.
mm,
Stephen Conroy again. He has the
mm,
Prime Minister's number. He's embedded in it. The power of the vested interest, and it's on the Liberal side too. Kai Cantwell, the current CEO of Responsible Wagering, ex Chief of Staffer, and Rushton, a
mm,
minister in the Morrison government. The power of people who had office, have the networks, the phone numbers, the pressure points, lobbying here. Uh, the second big force is, of course, AFL and NRL. Every
mm,
Prime Minister wants to be there in the box with Peter V'landys, Andrew Dillon, CEO, seen, cheered, loved. The irony here is the AFL fan survey uh, done recently has 80% of AFL fans wanting a ban on gambling ads. The
mm,
fans hate it.
mm.
But the CEOs of AFL and Peter V'landys NRL are the pressure points on the Prime Minister. That's the best explanation. You might have some, Allegra.
Mm. No, look, I think that these are, I think there's a huge piece to be played in terms of vested interest, and as you say, in terms of the question of, who's in the room and who's been making the points. And I think your point about Stephen Conroy is a very good one. I think that transitions always matter. So I would always say I understand why media is nervous about changes. I think the transitions do matter, and so if you bringing in bans, I think making sure that that transition is gives people time to adjust. I think that is fair. But let's be honest, it's not that the money will go completely away from the gambling
Mm,
advertising. It will be replaced maybe at a slightly lower margin. And this is what happens in broader points. We can't, I don't think, we've got much deeper problems with the media industry than can be fixed by sort of continuing to prop up gambling advertising and the impact that it has on ordinary Australians. So I think I think we really have to try and separate those two challenges rather than, I think, being used as an excuse in this space. And, sure, the sporting codes love the money, but that doesn't mean it's good for the country or nor good for the sports that these people, that we're also passionate about supporting. So I think there are some choices that we have. To make here as a country. I'm going to get to the another couple of questions before we wrap up. Um, you know, the I guess one question was, how do you think about funding about addiction? Because that was certainly one raise that's been raised by Tara as one issue that was raised is um, to say, how do you think about sort of funding for addiction? And I'm going to cover off just one of the other questions that we've got here, which is, are there other groups working on this issue? There are people, the Wesley Mission, like Revenue Stu Cameron. Um, and it would be good to know if these are other people are working also in this space, to defeat the industry. So love to hear a bit about that. And then lastly, we've got another person who's concerned about their local pub, or sort of local club and pub next to them is being asked to is put in a request to extend its hours, apparently because the New South Wales government wants it, and this is meaning that it's having a big impact in terms of pokies as
Mm,
well. Did you have
yes,
any comments you wanted to add to those kind of three topics there?
yes, sure. And thank you for staying with us. I know you would be wanting to watch 7:30 report to see if Barnaby shouts at his dog again, but thank you for being
Yes,
with
indeed.
us. um, those three things quickly. On addiction, we have to treat gambling as a health issue. That was a major recommendation of the Murphy report. Gambling is treated as a sports issue or a communications issue under the Minister for Communications federally. Um, a year ago, in neither any federal or state health department were there people working on gambling and addiction. It's incredible.
Mm,
It simply isn't treated as a health issue, and yet it's one of our major health issues.
mm,
Um, Secondly, well, let me go to who works with this. Stu Cameron and Wesley's been magnificent, and Stu's a close friend of mine. Look, there's been great academics out there, Charles Livingston, Sam Thomas, a heap of academics. There's been ACOS, and we at the Alliance for Gambling Reform have over 90 different partners. They're not simply focused on gambling, but they're focused on social issues from a wide range of areas who are very, very concerned about this. The big shift, just I might say, is really in the media. As I said, up till sort of, I don't know, 2007 or 8, I couldn't get any real focus from the media. The
mm,
media, because with the advent of gambling ads around 2008, has really started to understand this issue. So there's really good pressure, particularly the ABC. But curiously, the nine papers, Sydney Morning Herald and Age, whose bosses say, shut up, we get revenue, nine from, the NRL and gambling ads, uh, their journalists are brave. And there'll
mm,
be a front page story in the Sydney Morning Herald on this again tomorrow. So
mm,
we are seeing a lot of voices. And then, as I began, the independents being in Parliament, uh, if the independents in the last election had won the balance of power, I wouldn't be here tonight talking about this issue. We
yeah,
would have resolved it.
yeah,
Uh, the final issue, fight extension of hours. It is unbelievable. New South Wales has 30% of all the world's pokies in pubs and clubs. It is simply out of control.
mm,
And residents are literally the frog in the boiling water,
mhm.
just having the temperature turned up, always the industry winning. Fight with whatever means you can, an extension of hours.
Mhm. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to wrap up on the last couple of questions. We had Loretta who made the comment, I was a graduate working for the Commonwealth Government in the Problem Gambling Task Force when the AHA and clubs ran their campaign. It was heartbreaking to see the power they yielded, especially after the work and evidence and knowing the stories of those who'd lost to gambling. It's disappointing to hear these current bans are only partial. So thank you, Loretta, for sharing that. I'm going to
Mm.
finish off with a question from Tara, not from Tara, but from Susan, is how do we best, as ordinary citizens, convince those in power of the magnitude of this scourge on society, especially on our young folk? Look, I can only say is, if you want to still have an impact in this area, it is about writing to your MP. Now, a lot of people I know who are writing, who are on this call are actually working or not working, sorry, I'm working for you. So I'm your MP. But we had but crossbenchers Kate Cheney and David Pocock have actually set up a website called stopgamblingads.com.au. And so if you go onto that website, you can send an MP a message to your MP and to your senators as well, and to the communications minister. This is the time to do it. It's the Labor conference this week. My other crossbenchers, we've got ads going up. We've got a whole bunch of bumper stickers going on. You know, we know that actually a lot of the Labor Party is with this, but the government is not backing, is not currently, particularly the Prime Minister is not backing this. And so I think it is they need to feel the pressure of the community and of the members of parliament. And I think that's how your voice is heard, is make sure your MP, the senators and the communication minister know that this matters to you. So please get on there, write to your MP about this, like share the stories. I know they're absolutely heartbreaking, but they do make it real. And I think that's what people need to get away from just the numbers to, if you know, I mean, this is what has made some of the biggest impact on me as an MP is just listening to people's stories, people coming
Mm.
in, telling me about the lives that have been ruined by this, and how people are trying to do the right thing by themselves and by their family, really struggling. And this is a way that we can help them. So thank you, Tim, for all your work over many years. I feel like I'm Johnny come lately, having spent only 4 years working on this issue, but very proud to do it, and very proud what the work of the crossbench has been on this.
Mm.
And I know we'll keep it up. I know that we'll keep pressing and pushing as long and hard as we possibly can. So we won't give up. And thank you everyone for joining tonight. Thank you those who have, who have shared your stories with me, who have made, you have written already to MPs, have made this an issue that really matters, because it matters to you, so it matters to me. And I think this is something that matters to a lot of us. People stop me on the street telling me that they just want this to stop. And particularly they're worried about their young people, and that's why this matters. Thank you, Tim. I'll let you go and
Thank
get
you.
some catch up on your sleep.
Okay, great to be
Thanks,
with you.
night. Have a
See
good
ya.
night, everyone. Take care.
Bye.